Okay, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Brooke Bribriesco. I am PTO co-president, Brooke Bribriesco with Seg Phillips. And thank you for joining us today for our coffee talk with Principal Hughes. Today, we will be discussing culturally responsive parent engagement. So before we begin that, I would just like to remind everybody that we are beginning to fill the PTO roster for the next academic year. If you would like to participate in any of our roles, please look for the Sign Up Genius or feel free to email me at bribriesco, bribriesco @gmail. We have a variety of roles, big things from vice president of the board to maybe just doing one small event for teacher and staff appreciation. So there's a variety of opportunities to get engaged. And even on this topic of parent engagement, the PTO actually really helps us all stay informed and participate in our students' academic achievements. So please look for that. One role that we have is VP of Parent Education and Advocacy. And the volunteer this year is actually Kevin Lowry, and he helped to set up today's coffee talk. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Kevin. Thank you so much for all of your work this year. And I know you've participated in many other PTO roles before. So Kevin, thank you so much.
Thank you. With that being said, I'm also going to transition over next year to the high school. I am going to be the vice president of the PTO at the high school next year, which leads me to where I'm at today. I am the vice president of parent education and advocacy here at the middle school. I've been in this role before through PTO council as well as at the Woodbury. And so one of the things that I found in this role that we have tried to do or even dropped the ball previously is to find something to educate our parents on each year as we try to advocate for our students in the district. And so this year, what brought about this culturally responsive parent engagement meeting is that hopefully this right here will be the start of a conversation. What I have come to realize is that many of the target group that we really want to engage in our families here in the district are at work right now, 11 o'clock a.m. and are missing the conversation. But what we have found is that there is a very high number in the data of African-American youth that are experiencing more office referrals and suspensions inside of Shaker Middle School. And we don't want to just lay this on Shaker Middle School because after research, we found also that this is a nationwide issue. And it's just that this nationwide issue is touching our families here in the Shaker district, specifically the middle school. And so we brought this to Principal Hughes, who has been wonderful in discussing the situation that here in Shaker for the last 3 years, we have been talking about equity. We've been talking about equity within the schools, from the high school to the elementary school. And what we are finding is unequitable outcomes that are taking place in discipline. And so we didn't want to start a dialogue on what the teachers are not doing or what the students are doing. What we wanted to discuss are solutions for our district and how we can find a way to find more equitable outcomes for our students. And one of the things that we touched on in our immediately that we knew that which would be helpful is parent engagement. And so with that being said, I'm going to allow Ms. Hughes to go ahead and start, maybe talk about what the issue is and some solutions as educators that they have come across. And we're going to allow Brooke, who will be our moderator, for questions to come. So if you have any questions, we appreciate if you would type them into the chat so that Brooke can pull your responses and get the conversation started. And so I hope that I said enough. Principal Hughes, I'll leave
That was
it
a
to you.
great setup. Thank you, Mr. Lowry. Thank you, Brooke, for serving as our moderator. And thank you to all of our parents that are present for this discussion about culturally responsive parent engagement. And I want to preface before I get into the discussion, this is going to be a very different format than what we've used in the past for coffee talks. I really want to use this space for us to look at our data, to reflect on our data, to pose questions, to challenge our data, and to lastly present some ideas about how we can move forward. And as I have been in a very frequent contact with both Kevin and Brooke regarding this topic, we really hope this is not the last time we talk about this. We're using this meeting today as a catalyst for many conversations to come, because we know and we value the power of our parents, the power of our community, and we want to leverage our dynamic and powerful community to improve outcomes for all of our students. And so this is just a beginning conversation, a beginning reflection activity on where we are. So the topics for today in our top coffee talk are going to be for us to review our current discipline data. We also are going to participate in an examining data protocol that's going to allow us to ask questions, reflect, and propose some ideas. And then lastly, we want to discuss ideas related to culturally responsive parent engagement, because as Kevin discussed in his dynamic introduction, we want to find ways to engage all of our families and make PTO, this partnership with our school, one that is inclusive and recognizes the varying needs and the varying desires of participation with the school. And so here is our current discipline data, and it's very hard to read. So what I'm putting in the chat is a link for you to access our data sheet. It's tinyurl.com/April 2022 PTO data sheet so that you can see it more enlarged. But so far, as of yesterday, April 6th, we have a total of 460 office referrals. And I will go into what exactly an office referral is very shortly. And when we look at that data by ethnicity, 87.6% of those office referrals are for Black students, 3.9% are for white, and 4.6% are for multiracial students. And then when we look at how many of those office referrals translate into an out-of-school suspension, so far we've had 79 out-of-school suspensions. And so that's about a transfer rate of 17% from an issue stemming from an office referral and resulting into an out-of-school suspension. And of those out-of-school suspensions, about 86% of those are African-American students, while 2.5% are white students and 5.1% are mixed students. And then when you look at the distribution, and this is the center part of this diagram, when you look at the distribution of the varying levels of office referrals, level 1, which are low-level offenses, and primarily what we're going to focus on today. We're going to focus on looking at level 1 offenses, because as you can see, the majority of those total 460 office referrals are level 1 offenses. And so out of 460 office referrals, 369 were level 1 offenses. About 80% of our office referrals are level 1. 12.4% were level 2, and 7.4% were level 3. And so level 2 and level 3 are more serious offenses. But for the purpose of today's reflection, we're going to look at level 1 offenses. And so what are level 1 offenses? Level 1 offenses are office referrals for appearance and dress, cheating, plagiarism, and forgery, inappropriate use of technology, which very often means cell phone usage at inappropriate times, inappropriate use of electronics, which can mean, being on your computer, looking at inappropriate things during class time, disruptive classroom behavior and failure to comply, and tardiness and class cutting. And so the two major categories here are disruptive classroom behavior and failure to comply, and tardiness and class cutting. And once again, wanting to reiterate, if you're having a difficult time looking at this, I've linked for you the data sheet so that you can see it enlarged. So what is an office referral? Because not all of us may be familiar with what an office referral is. So an office referral is a method for a teacher or any level of staff at the school. It could be a teacher, it could be a custodian, it could be an admin assistant. It's a method for them to refer a student to an administrator, which would be myself or any of the assistant principals, to be disciplined through the completion of a form with information about the incident and what steps the teacher has taken to correct the problem. And so a referral means the misbehavior is either, one, too severe for the teacher to properly discipline the student in the classroom, or the teacher has tried to discipline the student on his or her own without success. So when either of those two things have occurred, we leverage the office referral system as a support to the classroom teacher. And then an administrator is assigned the referral, and that administrator decides on how to officially discipline a student. And when we see the word discipline, discipline should be viewed as education about the misbehavior and how we're going to redirect or even support. And so that administrator is making a decision about what supports need to be provided to that student regarding that misbehavior. So as we're making decisions about supports for students, the administration team uses what we call a multi-tiered system of supports. And in the education world, we refer to this as MTSS. And so a part of MTSS is we should have a strong tier 1, where we are universally providing education to students about academic expectations and behavioral expectations. And Shaker Middle School is currently in the process of trying to strengthen our tier 1 supports, because in strengthening our tier 1 supports, our goal is to prevent misbehaviors, because we are providing explicit direction and education about what our expectations are academically and behaviorally. And so our goal is we want to prevent those misbehaviors, so that when we're talking about increasing support to tier 2 or tier 3, which is the most intensive level, we are talking about a small demographic of students. But the reality is right now, because of our current status and still being in the midst of a pandemic, dealing with a cohort of students who have not been formally educated for 2 years, the needs are greater than this diagram is showing. And so when we talk about our tier 2 and tier 3, that's almost pushing into where tier 1 should be typically. So what is the middle school doing currently to address our need for strengthening our tier 1 supports academically and behaviorally? So we currently are going through a process of redesign work, where we have a core committee that has gone through a visioning process with a paid consultant to the district to support us with reimagining revisioning what the middle school student experience is here at Shaker Heights. And so as a part of that work, which started back in January of 2022, we've identified 6 drivers that we believe are going to support us with closing the opportunity gap between our Black and our white students. And so those drivers are, we want to develop systems that provide positive student relationships. We want to strengthen a guaranteed and viable curriculum. We want to establish a healthy climate and culture. We want to provide more personalized student support opportunities. We want to create a culture of continuous improvement where all stakeholders in our community are comfortable with reviewing our performance data and using that performance data to develop plans and put those plans in action and reflect on them and create an iterative process. And then lastly, we want to develop more effective school operations. We just want to make sure that we are utilizing the time, the talents of the people within our building at an optimal level. So I want to pause for 3 minutes, and I want us to observe our discipline data. And so if you cannot, and I'll re-share this on the screen, but remember there's a link for you to look at the discipline data. But I want you to reflect and write down your own individual observations. What can you see from that data? What important points pop out to you? What patterns or trends emerge to you? And what is surprising or unexpected data to you? And as you're writing these things down, you can feel free to put them in the chat to make your observations transparent to our group, because once again, I want to reiterate, this is a reflective space for us. This is the first time we're looking at this data. So we just want to create a space where we can all make sense of our current state as a school. So we're reflecting now. What do we observe in the data? And I have a timer going. It's just the one page of data that we're looking at. Yes. And the observation questions are in the chat too, since the discipline data is displayed. What can you see? What important points pop out to you? What patterns or trends emerge to you? Or what is surprising or unexpected data to you? And then I also want to remind us during observation, we just want to think about questions. We want to stay away from judgments or interpretations. There's going to be a space for us to interpret the data later. We just want to record our observations. Okay, so our 3 minutes is up. So now we have 7 minutes to share out our observations. And so Kevin, as our moderator, if you don't mind reading what's in the chat for us, and then just wanting to frame the observation discussion around, we're just sharing what we see. We're not making judgments or interpretations yet. There's going to be space for us to do that. We just want to stay in a subjective space, in an objective space right now, where we're just monitoring, sharing out what we see. Kevin, do you mind reading those?
I'm going to turn that over to Brooke, if you don't mind.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Brooke.
No problem. No problem.
Okay, so some of the observations include that the top 2 major categories, the percentage of African American students was higher. That was an observation. And then a question, I know we're not, I think you mentioned we're not quite at the question part, but I do want to make sure I pointed out was how teachers and administrators are being trained on this. Very important question I don't want to ignore. Again, the high percentage rate for African American students. There's a few more questions. I do want to read those out loud. The tardiness versus the cutting classes, breakdown of that, and show the timing of tardiness. So the breakdown is surprising and disappointing to another participant here with the African American students versus the lower percentage of white students. And another question about how appearance and dress is considered an offense. And then how does this data compare to Woodbury and elementary students? And this one was mine personally, but I didn't get a chance to write it in, but I was personally the total offense and the out of school suspension percentages are roughly the same. That was just, I don't know if I have a question that, but just an observation. So I think that's all we have in the chat right now. Thanks for these.
Thank you, Brooke. Going to open the floor. Does anyone want to share any verbal observations during this time?
Yes. And I asked it in the chat, and the observation that I was wondering about again is tardiness versus class cutting, because I like to know how many of our students are actually cutting class. Where would you go to in the middle school? And so with those being coupled together, I would think that the biggest percentage of that would be tardiness more so than cutting.
And so I'll respond to that question just from my anecdotal lens as someone who looks at this data all the time. Most of the offenses are for tardiness and not class cutting. When we talk about these categories are categories that are defined in our district student code of conduct. And so I definitely understand the need to want to see the tardiness and class cutting. And that's something that I can aggregate. I can go through the narratives of all those offenses and see and give us some data at a later time, tardiness versus class cutting, because that is a very good question.
I'd like to comment that I'm glad to see that the level 2, level 3 are lower percentages, but I'd also be interested in the breakdown of that. just
And we
to
can definitely explore
understand,
that later.
yeah, just to understand what the school is capturing. But
Thank you for that, Mrs. Davis. Any other observations that want to be shared verbally? Okay, so we can move on to the next phase of the data reflection protocol, which is for us to interpret the data and develop inferences. So this is where we're going to begin to ask questions. So we're going to silently look beyond the obvious for possible cause and effect relationships and to make inferences related to the data set. And we'll have 3 minutes to do this. So this, once again, wanting to reiterate, we're looking at level 1 offenses for the purpose of today. And so this is where we can, generate possible explanations as to why our data looks this way. We can ask questions, which we've started that process of asking questions. And then we can also ask for further data, which we've started that process as well. For example, we want to look at level 2 and level 3 breakdowns. We want to know the difference between tardiness and class cutting. What do those numbers look like? We can generate further questions here. So I'm going to set the timer for 3 minutes. And as we did before, we can share our questions in the chat, share our inferences, share our interpretations, and then we'll have 7 minutes to share those out with the whole group. Is it helpful for me to show the data again? Okay, I'll go back to that. Okay, our 3 minutes is up. We can share our inferences and interpretations in the chat. Brooke, do you mind reading those aloud?
Of course. Let me see. We have sorry, let me just get to it. There we go. It'd be good to see the other levels I'm so sorry. It's good to see the other levels are lower, but would like to know what the breakdowns are if available. How do we compare with the other districts and in the nation with these? And what training is offered to assist students as well as parents and teachers and administrators? So there's a few questions there. We also have overlapping, wondering if disruptive class behavior and tardiness or class cutting. The question needs to be addressed why students are avoiding being in class, why they are unhappy at school. Are there other alternatives available in place besides suspensions, like after-school detentions or Saturday detentions? Is tardiness up to the individual teachers, or is that a specific timing when they are referred to the office? How subjective are the referrals? What is the racial composition of the student body overall for comparison? Disruptive behavior sounds very subjective. Tardiness, class cutting may be more objective, but discretion is still involved. So those are some of the additional observations or inferences when looking at the data.
Okay, thank you, Brooke. Does anyone want to share any verbal interpretations, inferences before I go to answer the questions in this stage?
Yes, right offhand. I'm sorry. I'm doing like 5 things at one time, so I didn't type anything into the chat. And so I just think about the disruptions, and which is very subjective. And so on the person that's there. And so what I think about, as when I was looking at the data before, how much of this is criminalizing teenage behavior? How much of that subjective thought about that kid over there being disruptive, how much of that is that just that kid being a 14-year-old, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, I'll kind of add on to that. I know that there has been some anecdotal research done at the high school with some friends who were, purposely went to the bathroom at the same time, with the same teacher, but not at the same time, one Black boy and a white girl, timing themselves, returned back to the classroom within the same amount of time, and the Black student was reprimanded and the white student was not. And so my question is just about subjectivity when it comes to tardiness. I'd love to hear the data around, or the, information that's provided to the faculty and staff about how long the student can be, late before they are referred. So that's just my add to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I had a late ad on the chat, but I was curious if the late tardies due to late buses, is that included in the numbers?
I'll answer that question too. So going back to the question, I'm trying to, because a lot of them are similar. I'm going to go up to the top where it asks what training is offered to assist students as well as parents, teachers, and administrators. And so that currently is a problem of practice. With the current schedule, the current constraints of the collective bargaining agreement, there isn't a lot of time for professional learning. And in my first year here at Shaker Heights, I'm seeing that there's a need for it. And so if we go back to our redesign work in our driver diagram, in the middle of this is aligned professional learning. And so as we plan for next school year, we're being very intentional with our master schedule development to ensure that we have time to have very targeted, specific professional learning that aligns to all of these drivers. And so that's not something that we're able to solve now. Currently, as far as professional learning time with staff, I have 40 minutes on Friday at the end of the day. And we all know Fridays at the end of the day is not the best time to be delivering professional learning, but that's what I'm working with now. But we're working to shift that culture, shift that setup so that we can have meaningful time to reflect on a lot of the questions that you're asking. As far as the process for referring a student for tardiness class cutting, tardiness specifically, we have a protocol in place. The expectation is that the teacher is having a conversation with the student and the parent twice before they're submitting an office referral. And then that's when I intervene. Myself and Mr. Flood, as an assistant principal, we intervene and have conversations. As far as like what happens with the office referral for tardiness for us, my first go-to is to talk with the family to ensure that there has been two-way communication between that teacher, between that family, and then also have a conversation with that student. And that very often is the discipline. And then if the issue continues in a specific class, we look to alternative discipline measures, which could be a referral to work with Mr. Summers in our alternative to suspension space, where he is having more one-on-one coaching with that student, really discussions about like what barriers do we need to remove so that you can be on time to class? What are your issues? What are your concerns? How can we support? What can we remove? And so really, once again, trying to not go straight to out of school suspension. And then when those issues continue, the tardiness continues, at that point, it is no longer a tardiness issue. It's more of a compliance issue. And even a parent in the chat had posed the question of like, are we looking at, is this a deeper issue of why don't they want to go to class? And that quite honestly is a problem of practice for us as a school community, is what do we need to do? How do we need to shift our culture so that our students do want to go to class? And so that aligns to these 6 drivers that you see displayed. How can we deepen the adult-student relationships so that when students go to class, it's no longer about that class, it's about the relationship that I have with that adult? How can we strengthen our curriculum so that our students are exposed to more personal and culturally relevant learning experiences that they don't want to miss? And so these are all issues that we're addressing in our redesign work. Other questions that I see related to this inferencing protocol is the subjectivity of referrals. It is subjective. And so that's where when we are as administrators looking and speaking with families, we very often look to hear the student out, provide a space where the student is able to tell their story. Sometimes the narratives that come out of it are, I'm coming all the way from the auditorium, from band, and going all the way to the third wing, which is where 7th grade classes are, and I just don't have enough time. And so in those instances, there is no, quote unquote discipline, it's more of support. Well, let's have you leave your 3rd period class 5 minutes early. The issue with lunch, because lunch, as you've heard, as I am well aware, it is a mess, and that is going to be solved in next year's master schedule. But sometimes it's, I didn't have enough time to eat my lunch and I'm late. Okay, we'll fix that. Well, maybe you go to lunch 5 minutes early before the lines get long, or you're allowed. We have a conversation with that teacher. You're allowed to come 5 minutes late coming from lunch. And so the outcomes what matters though of those office referrals are the outcomes, and the outcomes are not always leading to suspension. Sometimes the outcome is just simply a conversation and support. But myself and Mr. Flood, we work very hard to engage in that conversation. Also, a new tactic that I've been using when it comes to persistent tardiness is inviting parents in to shadow. Do you have time to shadow your student for a half a day or a full day? And that's an attempt to be inclusive of the parent. I very much believe in giving our parents an opportunity to parent, and giving them an opportunity to support. And some, there have been families that have been able to do that, and it's helped tremendously, because then it provides a space where you're able to establish a positive relationship with your child's teachers as well. And so in that regard, we're being creative and how we're handling and managing things. And then also in the chat, I saw there are suggestions about like Saturday school. Those are things that we're trying to address through our redesign work, because with implementing Saturday school, you then have to worry about staffing. And as we all know, across the nation, there is a shortage of staff at different levels of the organization, from bus drivers to teachers to paraprofessionals. And so in that regard, we're trying to be proactive through the redesign work to put some plans in place for next year so that we can have more options available. And we don't want those options to feel punitive. More so, we want those options to create a sense of community, create a space where children can belong to something, whether it is extra support, extra help, on the weekend, in the afternoon. Those are all ideas that we are exploring through our redesign work. Did I miss anything?
Principal Hughes, I have a quick question. I'm sorry that I
Yes.
don't know this already. Are office referrals for tardiness the same as the Be There, Be Readies, or are they different?
Be There, Be Ready is gone. So we digitized our office referral system, where it's a web link, and teachers go there and fill out the incident, and then it generates an email to myself and to the administrative team. And then we are charging ourselves with responding to teachers within 48 hours of the outcome, because we also want to be supportive of our educators. We want them to know that when they're submitting an office referral, that there is some sort of action taken. And so when we respond, we're letting them know we had a student conference, or we met with a family, or we need that student to leave 5 minutes early to go to class. We're letting them know of the outcome of that office referral in an effort to support them. I see a question. The question about the late buses being included. No, so the late buses are not included because our security staff calls out the late buses in the morning when they arrive, and then an email is sent out to staff letting them know that a bus has been late with a list of the students' names. So those late buses are not included. And then once again, sometimes there are errors, and that's where it's very important when we get the office referral, we have the conversation with the child, because the child sometimes will say, I was on a late bus. And then I'm able to go back to those emails and say, okay, they were on a late bus. There's no, discipline here. Let's just, remind the educator that, they were on a late bus that day. And so it creates a space for us just to have a conversation. That's the first step for us as an administrative team with the office referral. We want to have a conversation with the child. We want to have a conversation with the family, because you should at all times know what's going on with your child, especially when it comes to discipline. And then for us as an administrative team, we want to make sure that you're included before it even escalates to an office referral, that you have been informed of the behavior. And so that office referral process allows us to connect with you and learn about what your experience is as a family. Is there any breakdown on what percentage of these office referrals are coming from substitutes who are not trained to handle this? So when it comes to substitutes office referrals, we have building substitutes that are assigned just to our building. And so they are trained in the office referral process, and those substitutes, the reality is they don't submit that many office referrals. Our substitutes don't. but they know what the expectations are, specifically with tardiness and class cutting, because as you see, that's our largest category. And they know what the process is, that the expectation is to have that conversation with the family, the student twice before you're submitting an office referral for the behavior. How many times is the referral just the teacher saying, I do not want to deal with this student today, and sends to office to handle discipline? That part, we're still trying to figure out a system to capture that, because there's an existing protocol where security is removing students from classes, and we don't have a protocol in place right now to measure that data. And that is something that we're working on with our safety and security team, is how can we capture when that is happening. There is a protocol in place that the expectation is when a student is removed, that there is an office referral submitted, but that doesn't always occur. Are there any questions about or any additions to the inferencing protocol?
I had the question about how do we compare with either other districts or the nation, or what are the goals that have been set for the year, and how do we compare?
Good question. We have not compared our discipline data to any national data, or even data amongst other schools within our district. We have recently established a district leadership team where it is a group from central office, all of our central office administrators and all of our building administrators. We meet once a month to discuss different data topics. And we just had our first meeting this past March. And quite honestly, this is a space where we could do that work. And so that will be a suggestion that I make to the district leadership team for us to compare our discipline data and generate, like we're doing right now with you as our family stakeholders, generate ideas for improvement.
The only other question I had real quick is this data with the disruption and maybe the cutting class, is it linked or has it been compared against maybe students with learning or behavioral issues?
It has not formally, anecdotally, because we know our students. And what I can say anecdotally is there is alignment between that demographic of students and the discipline data. And then it just goes back to, like on this driver diagram, just the support and the aligned professional learning in dealing with this. And then I don't want us to forget, we have teachers right now that are in training for an SEL program that we're going to begin implementing next school year, facing history and ourselves. I'm supposed to be in that training, but I had to take a break to come meet with you guys. But I had a conversation with a colleague, a teacher, an educator colleague in Savannah, Georgia, at a middle school, and at a high school, and she had the realization that her ninth graders have not been in school since 7th grade. And that's our current reality. Our 7th graders have not been in school since 5th grade. They did not have a Woodbury experience. They went from elementary, one teacher, one classroom, to having 7 classes and walking all over this huge, enormous building. And sometimes I think we leave that part of the narrative out. And that's an important piece. And it's also important to recognize in the education world, we very much rely on research-based practices. We don't have research-based practices in how to educate students after a pandemic, after 2 years of not being in a formal education setting. And so we're relying on action research. We're relying on what is working in neighboring districts in our city, in the state, nationally. And so it's research in action right now. And so a lot of the solutions, we just don't have tangible solutions right now, which is why it's so important for us to talk to all stakeholders, which is why we're talking to you right now as our families, because you've even posed reflective questions to me and ideas to me that we can take to our redesign team and flesh out some possible solutions.
And can I add that, bear with me, can I add that I actually joined the PTO while my son was in Woodbury for this exact scenario. Having a wife who graduated from Shaker and male cousins that graduated from Shaker. We have known that sometimes toward the middle school portion of their education, that there were some issues that came up with discipline. And I've been reading and watching across the country. The data that's been showing is that from pre-K all the way through middle school, that there are higher disciplines in the African-American community than the other cultures when they're in school. And when the students got to middle school is when they started noticing the difference in the way that they were treated. And it just so happened that the issue touched my son. And as the vice president of parent education and advocacy, I thought that this would be something to bring to the other parents' attention, because one of the things that I found that works as a solution is being vocal and being a face that comes to the school regularly, being vocal and talking to my son about education. I find that it was helpful with the student as well as with the educators, and stemming some of that discipline away from my son. I just thought that it would be very important for many of our parents in the district who aren't able to be as vocal and or present to bring this to their attention. And again, at 11 a.m. in the morning, we're really not really getting to the target group, some of the target group that we need to. And so I'm hoping that by starting this conversation today, that next we'll be able to have another conversation, maybe at a later time in the evening, where we can touch some of that target group that happens to be at work right now.
Thank you, Kevin. And so I see there are questions about gender breakdown, and we don't have that data aggregated in that way now. I will be collecting this chat because there are a lot of great reflections here. And I want to remind us, this is the beginning of conversations. And so for those of you that are here, I'm appreciative that you came today. Please share what we discussed with others so that the next time that we have this space to reflect and to learn from you as our families, we can include more voices and more narratives about the lived experience at the middle school. And I want to be clear that our school community is doing this redesign work because we want to improve the experience of our middle school students. We know that it can be better, and we are committed to making it better. We're committed to having it align with, education just looks different in 2022 than it did when I entered high school in 1996. And so we need space to be creative. We need space to have these conversations. We need space to reimagine, re-envision what we want our middle school to look like and feel like, because it doesn't have to continue this way. But it's going to require all of us to participate. And I want to say that I want to end with, because it's new now, and I want to honor your time because you probably have to go to your real lunch. I want to honor your time. And lastly, I want to say I am grateful that you were here to push my thinking as a leader, as someone who serves you, who serves your children. Thank you. If you have any other questions as they come up to you. You can always shoot me an email. You can send me a stream of consciousness. It doesn't even have to be a formal email. Anything that comes to your mind, please share. And our redesign work is not going to be just teacher stakeholder. It's going to include student stakeholders, and it's going to include you as families. And we have identified team leaders for these groups, and they will be reaching out to families to get your ideas about each of these 6 levers, because this is our school. This is our community. We own this together.
Principal Hughes, thank you so much. That was a really great hour. We appreciate the data, the transparency in the data, and the thoughtful conversation and all the work that is going into a better tomorrow for our students and our children. So thank you. Thank you to Kevin Lowry, our PTO volunteer, for helping to organize today's discussion. And like they both said, we hope to have another conversation in the coming weeks on this topic. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day and a great weekend. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Principal Hughes,
Thank
can you hold on for a
Kevin,
minute?
for